want to welcome everyone on behalf of the Yakima Association of Realtors, the Central Washington Homebuilders Association, the Yakima County Farm Bureau. We want to welcome Amanda McKinney, candidate for Yakima County Commissioner. So thank you for joining us this morning. And welcome everybody. If you have a question, down on the bar, there's a Q&A. You can go ahead and type your Q&A in there or your question in there, and we will get that answered. And you can also chat, put a question into the chat bar. Just make sure that it says, if you want it to come to just the panelists, it says all panelists. If you want everybody to see your question, then you'll need to change it to everyone. So let's get started. So the first topic that we have for you is about the homelessness issue here in Yakima. And we were wanting to know how you see Camp Hope and the new building, how that's going to work together, and your opinion on the homelessness and your policy on that.
And when you talk about the new building, I just want to make sure that where you're talking about the jail site, the jail. Okay, just want to make sure. Okay. Well, and I just thank you for having me come on and talk about these really important issues. It's just vital that we get as much information and dialogue out there as possible, because these are some really, really crazy things that are happening here in Yakima County and really impacting our area. And so homelessness is something that I know that we have seen all over, that's impacting large metropolitan areas. And unfortunately, we are seeing it seep in. And we do not want to have, what's happening in downtown Seattle and Portland and San Francisco come over to Yakima. But unfortunately, we've already seen some of that happening. It's impacting our businesses. It impacts our brand image. When people come through, they are seeing that, Yakima, we've got some blight that's in our areas, and it's impacting our businesses. So I am by nature, my business is housing. So I'm in real estate finance, and one thing that I know that comes up a lot about homelessness is affordable housing. But I am a firm believer that homelessness is more a symptom of mental health issues, drug addiction, things of those nature. Which is why, you mentioned Camp Hope, and of course there's also the Vineyards, which is an offshoot. Camp Hope has the same leadership there, as well as Union Gospel Mission. We've got a lot of partners in the community that are working together. So to get to the facilities, I think it's really important to acknowledge if we're talking about homelessness and we want to have an impact on homelessness for the positive, there's two really things there. There's the housing issue, and then there's dealing with mental health issues. The new jail site was proposed as an opportunity to provide some wraparound services, mental health intervention for people who are experiencing those crisis situations, which is a separate component for housing. I am not a proponent at all of government being involved in creating housing. I think that is where the private market comes in, and we'll get into this, but I believe that's why we need to really make changes to planning and permitting so that we can make it more desirable for real estate developers and investors to actually create truly affordable housing so that people can get into something along those lines. And that's changing square footage, footprints, lot sizes, units. We'll get into that later, but I think that's a separate issue. As far as the site for the jail, from the last couple months, because of COVID, that has really kind of taken a back seat. There has not been a lot of discussion since COVID about what's going to happen with the jail site if they're going to move forward with that. I have had conversations with Camp Hope, with Dave and Mike and UGM, and they're all feeling definitely in limbo right now. Camp Hope did have that issue that they were able to overcome by creating a separate nonprofit, and you know, those are important, and they need support of government to be able to come in to make sure that they get things escalated, such as, you know, needing to have that business license to go forward. But I would say that I'm supportive of plans that involved as little government finance as possible, but we do need to have, I think, government leadership. And that means that right now, what are the metrics? How do we judge success? And I think that's where there's leadership involved on the government side, so that we can say, okay, what is it? What's our goal? You know, YVCOG has done a great job, and there's been changes in leadership, and now Esther's been brought into the fold inside of the county. So I think those are some really great positive steps to take forward to try to manage. How do we decide what's going to be successful? And I'm very eager to get involved to be able to share what's happening in those meetings with the public, so that everything is about perception and brand image. And we're never going to feel like we're chipping away and having a positive impact on homelessness unless, as people, we see it. And that means driving down the street and noticing that the shopping cart that's always been there is all of a sudden gone. And so I think there are some really strong things that we can do as a community to at least clean up the unsightliness of it. But really communicate to the community, hey, this is where we're starting at. This is where our goal is. This is how we're going to judge that we're having successes. And this is how we're partnering with community partners to make sure we achieve that without a lot of funding from the government. So that I hope that answers the question. It's pretty broad, but it's a multifaceted question.
Great, thank you. And then just a reminder, if you have a question at all for Amanda, please drop it in the Q&A button or on the chat panel. So we are going to move on to another topic that's been on the minds of people in Yakima, and that is the lawsuit right now with the redistricting. And we would like to know more about your opinion on that, and what your policy would be on that.
So the One America lawsuit was something that was sent to the county in January, and we were given until July to respond. And I've talked about this issue at length with KIT, and we had a live debate that was last Thursday. The main issue I have with the lawsuit and the county's handling of it is simply that we were not responsive. Not responsive as far as there may have been dialogue between the county and One America, but not in a way that was made public. So the public perception is that we have just simply not responded. And that's not acceptable, because the public wants to know that we're at least handling our business. And I would say that even if it's, hey, COVID's happened and we aren't able to provide a full response, but we are at least acknowledging, we want the public to know that we have at least responded to this threat of lawsuit. As to the merits, there's a couple things here. One thing for me, I can say very plainly, is that a proposal that has come up has been ranked choice voting. And I'm not for ranked choice voting. And very specifically because it is not something that is readily acceptable or accepted, I should say, or sought after in any other municipalities. It's confusing. And we have a really prime example. The only other county in the state of Washington that has used ranked choice voting is Pierce County, and the voters voted it in, and they found it to be so confusing that they voted it out on the very next election cycle. So we don't have a precedent of it working. There's no drumbeat saying we really want this new thing. And so I think ranked choice voting is definitely something that I do not support for those reasons. The other issue that has come up is the possibility of making the general portion of the election cycle also in district as opposed to at large. So in Yakima County and many other counties, we have a voting system where the primary is in district. And then the general is at large. I think our form of doing it works great. I haven't seen any evidence, compelling evidence that has come forward that says that what we have is not working, and that doing it alternately and having even the general election be in district, that it would necessarily benefit. But I also haven't seen that it would be a negative either. So I think it'd be really interesting to look into that. And I'm certainly open to looking into it, but I don't know that it would necessarily have an impact, positive or negative. And then I would say the last thing is, I know that the point of the lawsuit was disenfranchisement. And I look at even the short list of candidates. Well, I wouldn't say short. There are 11 people who actually put their names on the list to potentially take to fill Norm's vacancy for his position, since sadly, he's passed. And when you look at that list, there are many people who are on that list who represent the Latino community, and I think it's fantastic. We have a history. We have had someone with Latino background on our commissioners board. So I think, if you look around, we've got a wonderful representation in our county, and I think it's just a matter of time sometimes. I know that for me, running for a countywide position, it takes a lot of soul searching to decide if this is something you're going to do. And so I think just by nature of the job being such a big job, and it's full time, and obviously there's a lot of responsibility there. So I would attribute, anyone, being disenfranchised. I think the job itself is probably just disenfranchising as a whole. And it does take someone who just happens to have a unique skill set to believe that they could contribute something and be effective at it. You're on mute, Jennifer. I'm a
Always
lip reader
happens.
a little bit.
Always happens with Zoom. Thank you so much. Again, if anybody has any questions, just drop it into the Q&A bar or the chat box. And we're going to move on to our next topic, and that is the planning and land use issues. And historically, it's been difficult to work with the planning department, and now with Lisa in charge, she has wanting to make a different culture and want to work more with developers. So what are you going to do to make sure that culture changes, and that that the planning department will be working better with developers and wanting to bring business to Yakima?
Yeah. I have to say, this was one of the top reasons for me to want to be on the commissioners board. So having a career that's based in real estate finance and development, this is something that I saw come up all the time. I felt the pain alongside customers who were having to deal with these issues. And it's not just people who are looking to develop and build homes. There are frustrations from people who are having issues because they maybe want to put, coverings over their horse barn and running into big issues. And, I will tell you, my number one perception is that there's a lack of understanding of why we want to provide customer service. And I would agree, you mentioned culture. So I think it's an understanding of why it's important. Nobody wants to raise taxes. And so to me, our revenue comes from property taxes. And it seems to me that the best way to increase revenue is to encourage people and promote the idea of people who want to voluntarily improve the value of their property. If we have people knocking down our doors saying we want to do this great thing that's going to add value, that only increases our revenue. And I would much rather see people have their taxes increased because they chose to improve their own property value, as opposed to going back to the entire county and saying, well, we've got a deficit. So I think knowing and understanding the cause and effect of putting up all these barriers is a huge importance. So it is a cultural thing, and so I think it's understanding that. How I would propose to actually make changes. I know that they recently had some of the applications are able to be submitted online. Of course, that's wonderful, except if the person on receiving it on the other end is still ideologically not in tune with the reason why it's important to treat that individual in a way that's going to leave them with a flowery taste in their mouth. And so I think it's no secret to anyone who takes a drive outside of Yakima County, or who is in business with, I'll just use Realtors as a prime example, and builders who travel outside of the county. Walla Walla, Moses Lake, Tri-Cities, Wenatchee, they're killing it. They're crushing it. And it's because they provide exceptional customer service. They understand that there is something called an exception. They work their way around it. I can say that in lending, Obviously every person who wants to purchase a home has a unique set of circumstances, and we don't create necessarily a unique situation for underwriting for every single individual, but we are able to make exceptions. And the idea is that we've got a professional helping them along the way to navigate and be set up for success. And so I like to equivalent it to my experience in lending. I'm the expert. My first time home buyer is not. My job is to make sure that I understand the rules and find a way to navigate them through the path of to get to the end goal, which is the success. And that means that our people in planning and permitting should have that same mindset. Instead of saying, and I will say this always, I have never in almost 20 years ever said to someone, no, it's not yet, but I'm the expert. And I know that if we do these three things, and I'm going to hold your hand along the way, and we've got a plan of action and a goal, we're going to get to the end together because my job is to help you get approved. That's the whole point. And so I think that's a separate mindset. And I think what we need to do, honestly, is have some of our people go job shadow. I would love to take a tour of the planning and permitting departments and have them talk to their counterparts and understand how is it that other counties are able to say yes and have such thriving development and have good customer service. And it's because it's an ideological thing. And so I think it starts at the top, but really I want to sit down with every single person who works in that planning department and ask them, what's your job? What do you see your role as being? And if it's not to provide exceptional customer service and find a way to say yes, then that's where our problem is. And lastly, I know a lot of us who are in sales, we're into customer service surveys, and it's vital. And I think in this case, I would like to have a customer service survey go out to every single person who applies for a permit in the county. And I actually want it to come straight to me. I want to see it myself so I can gauge what are the issues and try to pinpoint where those are. It's no different in business. You've got one store that's working well. Why are the other stores not performing as well? If you've got certain employees that are having a consistent complaint that comes up, then we need to identify it so we can coach and train our way around it. So those are some of the very specific suggestions that I plan to implement as soon as I join the Commissioners Board.
Great, thank you so much. And we did get yeah, I'm on. Okay. We did get a question from one of our members, Sherry Daniels, and she would like to know, how would you handle a budget deficit?
Mm-hmm. Budget deficit is something where we've all experienced it in our homes and businesses, where it means tightening up bootstraps. So for me, budget deficits, the very first thing we have to do is go and look at eliminating or cutting back on certain programs. I'll use a perfect example. City Council right now is working on budget deficits. And one thing that they're looking at is, and the federal government does this, if we're giving aid or we're giving grants and we're doing certain things, we need to make sure that every department is going to have to cinch up a bit. And I would love to see certain departments come through with ideas of ways that they can become more efficient. I know on a national scale, we kind of have, this is the same with funds or regulations. If you want to bring something new to me, then I'd like for you to submit 2 things that you'd like to take away. And I think employees, if anyone's worked for a major corporation, I know I have, we have great ideas as employees. We see the inefficiencies. We have great ideas. And so I think involving the employees and asking them to be and incentivizing them to go ahead and come up with suggestions on what they see as something that isn't working, that could be more efficient, that's a cost saving benefit. And that could be something simple as, let's say road maintenance. And we're having certain vehicles that, and I'm not saying I know exactly the terminology or how often, but let's just say that certain road maintenance vehicles have a certain maintenance requirement. And maybe someone who's working there all the time understands that, that particular equipment isn't getting used enough that it technically needs to be serviced as often. All those expenses add up. So I would use that as a perfect example of how an employee could perceive that there is an expenditure there that is not necessary, and we can cut back on it so that we're saving. I hope those are specific examples enough, but Sherry, if that's not sufficient, please let me know.
Great, thank you. There aren't any more questions. We'll move on to our next topic, and that is well water utility. And we would like to know what your opinion is on that issue and if you see any less invasive options for that?
Uh, my dislike of the well metering is very high. I believe that we jumped in and made bad policy to avoid a lawsuit. Uh, if you look around, you see that none of the other counties decided that they needed to jump onto this, and here we are, and we've created this utility. Less invasive. I'm not a fan of it altogether. I think that it also brings up a lot of constitutional property rights. I look at it in the sense of, the traditional mindset of owning a property is that is your property. And if you decide that you're going to breathe the air or dig the dirt, that's yours, you purchased it. So I think it brings an interesting level of complexity to how much of your property do you actually own. Having said that, I recognize this stems from, a lawsuit, and we have an integrated plan, and we've got to figure out how to work within the confines of that. So I am open to anything that would at least diminish significantly the cost to our property owners. I can say that if you have someone who is accustomed to, well, let's just use, because I see it all the time, um, it, the certain specifics, and I'm sure that a lot of people listening right now will understand the specifics, but just in case, there's certain requirements of where you can't hit number one, you got to hit number two, and there's a big difference in the depth. So for example, going from a well that traditionally someone would have only had to have spent, $5,000, all of a sudden it's a $35,000 cost to drill. Uh, Looking from a finance perspective, that is a huge difference in financing costs for the cost of that home. Uh, and it definitely is putting people out. And I know from firsthand experience that people are absolutely choosing not to build, or it's putting it out. And I think that this is a prime example of one more thing that we are putting in as a barrier in front of people to voluntarily improve the value of property. And so I know that there are several people who have been working in Yakima locally who are trying to find suggestions. And as county commissioner, I am 100% willing and looking forward to, eager, I would even say, to try to find a way to repeal or replace with something that is far less intrusive and costly. Because to me, it's a property rights issue too. I just have a hard time with it for that reason.
Great, thank you. And I just wanted to point out that Sherry did say that your answer was a great answer, and she likes your idea of involving employees in the budget process. So let's now just open the floor to any questions that you have for Amanda, and yeah, see what our viewers are interested in knowing more about. So please drop your questions into the Q&A. Oh, we have one right now. Philippe Holbrook would like to know more about the COVID response and your opinions on that.
And I understand. I'm going to go ahead and wager to guess that Philippe would like to know what my perception is of how we've handled it and what I would have done differently. So I'll go with that. Sure. And if there's more questions, then I'm happy to do that as well. So my perception is that we handled it very poorly from the beginning with regard to communication. In fact, I felt like we were in a vacuum of communication. I think to this date, most people do not have a clear understanding of who is actually in charge of decision making in Yakima County when it comes to COVID. And the confusion stems from, of course, the Yakima Health District Board, and the relationship with the board and our health officer. And as a layperson, all of us, we're only able to go to the monthly public meetings, and that's the only place that we can get our information, which I have done. But knowing that of the 7 board members, 3 are our county commissioners. And so I had a really hard time struggling with how we were not receiving communication. I think it took about 3 months into the shutdown to get a press release from our county commissioners board acknowledging what was happening. I am big on communication and transparency of what's happening behind closed doors. In a crisis and a pandemic, a global pandemic, the last thing we needed was to have nothing. And so what I started to do was on my own, just as a candidate who had 2 kids at home because of COVID. And as many of you know, rates are low. My business is really busy right now. And it was important to me, though, that I found answers. And I had a lot of people asking me questions. And so what I did was conduct interviews and was constantly posting interviews and links of resources and trying to get the word out to try to eliminate as much confusion and frustration out there as possible. And I am looking forward to having the opportunity to be on the commissioners board to extend that reach. As a candidate, obviously, I didn't have as much of an opportunity to do so, but we should have had that from the top. Um, and I want to be clear, and I mentioned this in the debate. I think hindsight's 2020. I'm not talking about policy. I think that I do believe truly that anyone involved with decision making on a local, state, and federal level has only ever thought that they were doing what was going to protect lives. I do not agree with Inslee with our phase reopening, and we can go into that. That's a whole nother subject. But I think as a whole, that's what I would perceive as a major issue, that we missed the boat and we did not communicate well. And that is something that I absolutely am committed to doing differently. I've already shown that that's my natural instinct to do it. And I think that's what's missing on our commissioners board. And Philippe, let me know if that's enough, or if I can go into detail about Safe Start or anything else.
All right, while we're waiting for Philippe, Dennis Rose has asked, Yakima has the worst well policy in Washington, and I'm glad you recognize this issue. What's the likelihood there will be a change?
So I think in some instances, a little bit of not being on the inside can be good, because from my perspective, if someone says, well, it's in, it'll never change, I don't look at things that way. I've always looked at things in a way that, if there's enough people who decide that they want to get involved and make a change, then it'll happen. We just need to know that the will and the desire is there. We have an incredible resource in Yakima County, and that is our nonprofits and our organizations, such as Central Washington Homebuilders Association and the Association of Realtors. We are, all of us, if we collaborate and combine forces, there's a lot of good that I think can be done there. Most of all, it takes time. We're passionate because it's our industry. And so it really does, again, come down to communicating from the top at leadership to the general public, so that they understand why this is bad policy and how it's impacting us negatively as a county. And I see that as the role of the commissioners board, is to be able to communicate that. And again, I absolutely, I will take as many volunteers as possible to try to come up with solutions to eliminate or find, as we mentioned before, repeal or replace. There's got to be something that's better, because what we have is terrible.
Great, thank you. Philippe has a follow-up question to the COVID response. As a follow-up, could a firmer response to the governor result in less restriction?
I say yes. I think that we did not put pressure on Governor Inslee from the beginning, when we recognized that the metrics that he chose were absolutely unfair to counties that had demographics such as ours. We didn't give any pushback whatsoever. And it wasn't just us. As we all know, we've been grouped together in kind of these, the five of us, we're just these, terrible people who don't know what to do in Eastern Washington. And that's the narrative. And that's not acceptable. And I used an example before of, obviously, we're an ag industry, and so are our neighbors, and we are proud of that. And when we started to hear that we were being targeted for our high numbers, specifically our ag, let's use the example of our ag producers and warehouses. Of course, they're big stories because they were having outbreaks, and we were criticized because of the lack of PPE. Nobody in leadership stood up for our ag industry and said, well, wait a second. Our ag industry took all of their PPEs from the beginning and donated them to our local medical facilities, because if we all recall, on March 13th, the idea is that we were going to flatten the curve. This was not about eliminating COVID. This was about flattening the curve and making sure that our medical facilities could adequately care for people who were going to be impacted, so that we could safely, take care of ourselves as a community. And why didn't we have anyone stand up for ourselves and say, hey, this is not okay? I absolutely love Yakima County. I love everything about it. And our neighbors, I know, feel just as passionately about their counties. And I think we should have had a much stronger response uh, from the beginning to say that you can't paint a picture about us. That is not a narrative that accurately reflects us. And I will say also that, you know, we did have the opportunity, and especially on one occasion where Inslee actually came to Yakima County, but he wasn't allowed to be questioned. Our leadership let him come in and out a back door. Uh, no other leadership was involved in knowing. We had our representatives who didn't know that he was going to come here, so they could have the opportunity to try to use, you know, what relationships and influence they had over him to try to, you know, have him see the light. But you know what? We got what we asked for, which is not a lot. And we have to be pressing always on behalf of Yakima County and our residents from the very beginning to make sure that, you know, we're the squeaky wheel. We want you to hear us. And that's just not just COVID. That's going to end up being for everything because we have a big hole to dig ourselves out of after COVID. Our brand image has suffered prior, and now we have a bigger hill to climb. But I'm ready to climb it because I climb mountains.
Great, thank you. Does anybody else have any more questions for Amanda? Okay, we have one question come through. I would like to state for the record that our leadership was given a very short notice he was coming to town. It was supposed to be a Zoom meeting and they were surprised. So that was one comment that we just received. Does anybody have any other questions for Amanda?
I would say to that, you know, I'm really eager to get a Facebook page, social media up for the County Commissioners Board. And that's a perfect example of, you know, even when something happens very quickly, that's a really easy way to be able to let everyone know that this is happening and we're out here working for you. And Inslee's just arrived and we might have been surprised about it, but we want you to know right now that he's here. Let us know if you've got any questions.
Okay, last call for any questions for Amanda. So while we're waiting for some questions, oh, we have one. Great. Mayor Patricia Byers and Commissioner Baker can add more detail to this, was the comment to your statement.
Absolutely, I'm sure they can.
Great. All right, any more questions? All right, thank you, Amanda, so much for joining us this morning. And if any of our viewers have questions, how can they get in touch with you?
Absolutely. I would love to hear your ideas. And especially, again, a lot of us, we're in tertiary industries and it's really important. I'm a huge advocate for Yakima County for our housing and our real estate because it's a driver. And as we said, for all the reasons for revenue. So it's in my nature. I answer my phone and text messages and emails. So as far as the campaign goes, you know, if you email me at work or my personal email, I will answer it. But the email for the campaign is amanda@amandamckinney.us. That's the website also, amandamckinney.us. I'm on Instagram and I'm on Facebook. And then my cell phone number, you can Google my cell phone number. It's been that way for 20 years, 833-4857. And I would love your suggestions. Obviously, this has been a really incredible time for all of us to deal with a booming housing market, only to have everything kind of collectively we inhaled. And it took a couple of weeks for us to exhale, but our industry has much to be proud of. And I would love to hear your thoughts and ideas on how we can make sure that we're all working hard to make Yakima County a wonderful place to raise children and have businesses and have a strong housing market. And that's the idea.
Great. Thank you so much, Amanda. Just to let everyone know that this was recorded today and will be available on our social media next week. So if you've missed this, you'll have another chance to hear what Amanda has to say on different issues that affect our industry. So thank you so much, Amanda, and
Thank
good luck
you.
with your race.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.